with the crew, and you understand why people make those key decisions and how they got to that point because of their work experience and their previous experience and their histories.
Sure. And in looking around in the mix here, it looks like we have some baby boomers. And at one time, the baby boomers were the 21 crowd. Now the baby boomers are in the 40s and now entering the 50s. And then we've got the X generation and we've got the Y generation. Any other generations I'd leave out? I don't think so, yeah. But we'll soon find out as they're knocking on the door. That's right. Let's hear from Group 4.
Well, like everybody else, we pretty much went down the list and looked at all the different dimensions, both primary and secondary, and just taking out the first, or the four primary, selected age, like every other group. We go from Mark being 43 to Josh here being 28. So with that, it's different experiences, life experiences, backgrounds, and then 2 being mental, physical health. Like Fred was saying, it's important to come to work to be prepared, to be physically strong, mentally strong, to deal with what we deal with day in, day out. And then the third item being communication styles. We're all different in how we deal with the public, deal with ourselves. So if we're on an incident where something's not going well, we can transition from one individual to another. Josh is going to deal with somebody differently than I am. So it gives us the opportunity to utilize our strengths and weaknesses. And then the fourth one being education. And education leads into our work experience, work ethics, who we are, what we are, and what we can offer the group.
Very good. Thank you. Good comments. Good discussion. Now, up to this point, we've talked about the dimensions of diversity, the primary and the secondary. Are there any questions about the dimensions of diversity? The thing to keep in mind is having that awareness. And just because one size doesn't fit all doesn't mean that the other sizes don't add value. And that's the thing that we need to remind ourselves, looking at things from a more broad-based spectrum approach instead of just being tunnel vision. It's important that we're peripheral, as we all know. That's critical. So keeping that in mind, I think you did an excellent job on this group activity. People, when they hear the communication process, they think of a Speech 101 class. And by a show of hands, how many of you remember taking a speech class in high school or college? And when it comes to taking a speech class, it's not one of the things that people normally relish. They can think of better things to do than taking a speech class. Because public speaking, that's the number one fear in adults' lives. Death ranks number 7 for that purpose. But I'd rather give a speech instead of having a visit from the death angel, speaking for myself. So the communication process is a skill. And like any other skill, we can become very good at it. And when we look at the mechanics for communication, it is a process. And we know this where when you have two people communicating, you have the transmitter, the person who's sending the message, and then you also have the person who's the receiver, the person who that message is being directed to. And in public safety, we can think of it as a radio transmission, where you're broadcasting a message, and you've got the transmitter, and then you've got the receiver, the person who's receiving the message itself. Now this is where it gets interesting, folks. This is called active listening. And I think we've all been here. And that is, let's say you need to talk to someone and you go into someone's office, and let's say it's a lieutenant or a captain or someone of higher rank. And you say, I need to talk to you, Lieutenant. I need to talk to you, Captain, about an issue. And you have a seat, and they're sitting behind their desk, and they say, go ahead, start talking. And they say, well, I see that you're looking at the magazine here. I can multitask. Go ahead. I can hear what you're saying as I'm reading from this magazine or this newspaper or this report. I can guarantee you they cannot multitask. You have to do active listening if you want to hear what a person has to say. And it's not any different than being at home when you're watching a sporting event or you're watching a movie or you're watching the news and they say, I got to talk to you. They say, okay, well, go ahead. I can listen and watch and hear what's going on at the same time. It's not true, because we find out as we talk to that person and just checking in with them, maybe they heard every other word or every other 3 sentences for that, and then we get frustrated. So active listening means that you've got to be focused on that. And that's difficult, because it's difficult for me to do that myself. So I need to remind myself. I need to make a conscientious effort to listen to what that person's doing. Then the last part about this is we've all been in a social setting where you've got a room full of people and someone comes up to you and starts talking, and then you're scanning to see who's coming in to the event there. So you really don't have that active listening. And then if someone of higher stature, let's face it, you see someone of higher rank or someone else, what do? You focus on that person now. So active listening means being focused on that individual. And with that, that means no interruptions. You've heard people before where they're searching for a word. What do we do sometimes? We fill in the blank for that sentence, don't we? And that's similar to interrupting a person. Let them finish the sentence. And I realize it's difficult, because it's difficult for me sometimes too, especially when I'm talking to a family member or my spouse. And I've got to say something, but I'm being rude by interrupting them. So out there on the scene, we're trained, we're focused, we're being tactically orientated on that. Back in the firehouse, we're kind of relaxed, we're letting our guard down. So no interruptions. And then acknowledging what the person has to say. Some of the things that we do for acknowledging is shaking our head. And if we disagree with the person, we do one of these horizontals as opposed to agreeing, the vertical. What are some other things that we can do to acknowledge a person when they're talking? Smile, that's right. Smile. A genuine smile. Roll your eyes. Roll your eyes. That would definitely be feedback, wouldn't it? That would be feedback. And we go, sure, right. Sometimes we say yes, and then we hear from them say, oh, you agree with what I'm saying. No, I'm just acknowledging what you're saying by saying yes. So, you may have been in those situations. What's paraphrasing? What's paraphrasing? Paraphrasing is when you are repeating back to that individual in your own words what you just heard from them say. Without parroting, mimicking what they said, you're using your own words to repeat what they just said. And that's quite effective if you want to ensure that that person's hearing what you're saying. I do that with my kids. They do that with me too. And as a supervisor, the troopers do that to me, and I do that with them also. And I've got to be careful when I start talking about upper management, because, now we're talking about a different venue. But paraphrasing is critical. And feedback. Feedback is now when you get your turn to respond to what they just said. And that's where the rolling of the eyes, or if you've got a stack of papers, say, oh, that's a crock, or whatever. And we're not talking about a crock pot either, are we? No, we're not. So that's part of the process in communication. Now, this is something that is interesting and something we can't forget. And that is, some people are linear. Some people are matter of fact. It's cut and dry. Things are based on logical thinking. So you know where that person's coming when they're being linear. Then you get those people who are circular, and it's difficult to follow them when they're talking, because you say, which planet are they orbiting around right now? And is there a philosophical message here that I'm supposed to grasp? So that can be challenging when people talk in circles, because you're trying to follow them, but then you say, which galaxy are we in? And where's the moon evolving, so forth. So those are some things. Now, keeping that in mind, we need to look at the modes of communication. Dr. Albert Mehrabian did a study on the modes of communication. And he said that there's 3 modes of communication. And probably the one that people truly pay attention to is body language. Body language. And body language consists of facial expressions. That's where the smile comes in. And some people say there's certain professions where if the lips move, that means that they're lying. I won't name those professions. But you've got the gestures, where people, you tie their hands behind their back and they can't communicate. So people use gestures for that purpose. And then you got body movement where people walk around. And then you've got just the posture of an individual. So 55% of communication is body language. And then 38% is tone of voice. How many of you have heard the adage that says, it's not what you said, but how you... That's right. So that's important. Tone of voice. Any of you ever filled a phone call from an irate caller that's saying, his or her tone of voice was really inflammatory? Well, did they use obscenities? No. Did they question your lineage or your ancestry? No. It was his tone of voice, so, that it's almost like fingernails across a chalkboard, for those of you who can remember that in your classroom days. I realize they don't have chalkboards in the classroom anymore, especially with those schools who have funding. But anyway, tone of voice is important. And it's also the saying, mean what you say and say what you mean. And let's face it, politics, public officials, we say, well, what do they mean and what are they saying? So tone of voice. And then 7% are the actual words, where we as a society, we as a civilization, we don't really pay that much attention to the words anymore, do we? We look at the body language. We look at the tone of voice and the words. And if someone is a car salesman, what do you look at when you're listening to that car salesman? You're looking at body language. You're looking at tone of voice. And you're trying to listen to the words. But if they're doing all the talking, they're not allowing you to say what you want for what type of vehicle you want to purchase or what type of model you're interested in. So modes of communication are critical on that. And excellent communicators, they are skillful at this. We're going to do something a little different this time, and this is the pair share, where you team up with another individual. And everyone's going to get a turn. You're going to have 3 minutes each, where the first person, who is going to be the transmitter, they're going to identify their favorite movie, your favorite movie. And why is it your favorite movie? And as you're doing this, both of you use the communication process. So if you need to turn to that page to refresh your memory, that's okay. And then after the 3 minutes are up, then you change roles where the other person gets to share their favorite movie and why, and using the communication process. So you choose who you want to team up with, and then we'll begin. Siskel and Ebert would probably welcome some of the comments on the movie reviews here. Ebert would. Siskel, that's another story because he's no longer alive. However, that's true, Anyway, let's hear from maybe the one person is giving their account. I'd like to hear from the person after you're done giving your account if they follow the communication process, and then the other person if you follow the process steps. So who wants to go first from group one?
Okay, I was talking to Ted, and his favorite movie was Full Metal Jacket, and we were talking about because it's graphic, yeah, but it's very realistic. And he was also talking about the camaraderie and the fight to, no matter against overwhelming odds, how these people all pulled together and they still kept fighting and working together, even though there were like racial differences and a lot of diversity in that group of people in the movie. That when it came right down to it, they still had to pull together and keep on plugging for the main cause.
Good.
So did I get it?
Absolutely.
Cool.
That's exactly what he said.
And since the two of you were conversing amongst each other, would you say that with the awareness on the communication process, did you focus more on listening to what they were saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. When you were listening to each other and you were talking yourself amongst each other, did you notice that some people were linear and some people were circular? Was there any circulars in your groups? You won't admit it? Okay. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Because we were focused, Aaron. That's why we weren't circular. That's right. So we were linear. Well, good. And this is a skill. This is a skill that we can all become proficient at and master. And we don't need to be fearful of it, because really when you think of fear, as Zig Ziglar would say, it's nothing but false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. And then on the humorous side, where you got Mona Moon, who's a comedian, she says, forget everything and run. That's her definition of fear. But I prefer the Zig Ziglar approach, where it's false evidence appearing real. And as we know, it's a skill. We can become very proficient at the mastery of communication, just not as a speaker, but also as a listener. And it does improve relationships for that purpose. Speaking of relationships, by a show of hands, how many were in an elevator the last 6 months? You've been in an elevator the last 6 months. And when you're in that elevator, and if you're by yourself, and if some stranger walks in that elevator, do you value the space between you and that stranger? Some do, some don't. Those of you who, hey, we like to have that intimate space, we'll talk about that. So this now ushers on to proxemics. Proxemics. And with proxemics, we're going to look at a scientific viewpoint toward personal space. And I'm not going to do a William Shatner space, the final frontier here, but space is important to most of us. And Edward T. Hall, who's an anthropologist, did a study on this, and this is true. This is true for most cultures when it comes to space, proxemics. Intimate space is where you have actual body contact up to 1.5 feet away. And that's why they call this intimate distance. And when you think of the intimate distance between two people, you've got lovers, you've got children, you know, that nuclear family where you trust each other. So you don't feel threatened by that person being up close to you. Now, when you have an ex-spouse or an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend, then you want to keep your distance, normally. From a cultural standpoint. But intimate space is something that all of us value. And then you have personal distance. Personal distance usually ranges from 1.5 feet to 4 feet. And think of friends, close friends who you talk to, people who you feel comfortable with, people who you trust. You don't mind them being 1.5 feet up to 4 feet away from you. So it's normal when we think about this. And then the next one is the social distance. This is where you're dealing with someone on a professional basis where you really don't know that well, so you keep about 4 feet away. And you know, if it's any further than 12 feet, then you start having some difficulty hearing what they're saying. You may have some ambient noise surrounding you with some music or some other people talking. So if they're going to be 12 feet away, it's going to be kind of a strain to hear what they have to say for that purpose. So social distance is about 4 feet. In police work, they call this the violator contact, where they don't want someone closer than 4 feet away from the officer. more or less like arm's distance. That's about 3 to 4 feet because of their personal safety. And people who you don't really have a liking to, you prefer to keep them at least 4 feet away, if not more. So this is social distance. Then we have the last one, that is public distance, where you have 12 feet separating you and that individual or more. Anyone been to a rock concert in the last year? Which one? I don't want to say. Wise choice, wise choice. Now, it's almost like telling a news journalist some information but not giving them the full details because they want to know more. Now we have struck the curiosity amongst all of us. So that will now be our crusade to find out which concert you went to. Where's Waldo? Where's Waldo? But public distance, when you listen to a politician speak when they're addressing a group of people, an election campaign, an event, you're going to look at least 12 feet away, separating the listeners from that politician. If it's a president of the United States, you're going to have the Secret Service protecting that individual. No one's going to get closer than 12 feet unless they're at a fundraising event where you pay $10,000 to shake the president's hand. It doesn't matter who's in office, Democrat or Republican, for that purpose. So you've got the public distance. And these are things we need to be aware of when we're communicating with people. If you are at the firehouse and if you are trying to be friendly to a fellow firefighter on your shift, and if they don't allow you to get any closer than 12 feet to them, should you be concerned? But if you're having a meal, and they just have that separation barrier 12 feet, sooner or later you're going to start thinking, why is that person keeping their distance from me? This is a pair share activity where everybody gets 3 minutes each. Hopefully it shouldn't take that long, but no more than 3 minutes each, where I want you to team up with another individual. That means you need to get up from your chairs here, and I want you to find a place in this room here where you take, and I would recommend someone starting here and then taking 24 steps away from that person until you run into the wall or a fixed object, because I don't want you to get injured and I don't want to do an OSHA investigation here. And then I want you to turn around and face that person and share what you did on your last birthday. And I want that other person to listen to what you're saying, but as you are talking, I want that other person to start walking to you as you're talking. And then you need to stop when you feel comfortable and not being any closer than what you think is necessary as you're talking to that person. Are you with me? Very good, good, good. And then after you're done doing that, then switch places. Let's begin. As firefighters, you know that there is no predictability in what you do. Every alarm or run is different. And if everything was the same, you probably would not have chose this profession because of the variety and things being different. So to keep honor with that pattern here, we're going to start with group 4 instead of going with group 1. So I need a representative from group 4, why, what did you notice from this exercise on proxemics?
I'll go. Sure. I noticed that I would stop a lot sooner because I'm thinking about it. And then after I had stopped and we talked about something else, it actually was a little bit closer that I was actually comfortable with. So at first I would be a little bit more standoffish just because.
Mm-hmm. About how far for a distance would you say you were when you stopped?
2 or 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's within the personal distance as opposed to the intimate, right? So. Hopefully. Let's hope. No one had a yardstick out. No one had a yardstick out measuring.
Well, I think me and my partner here are the two ends of the spectrum. I am very standoffish. I can say a whole book full of words in 2 words. You know, I'm a short conversationalist. Where Troy is the opposite of that. Not no insult meant there. But let's see.
Don't surprise
About-
these guys with details.
Yeah, about 3 or 4 feet. I was the listener, so that's where I started to slow down and stop. And I have a great personal distance from other people. Need.
You value your space.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, because Oscar's personal space was probably a little bit greater than mine, I found myself using the TV and the TV stand almost as a tool to triangulate a little area of closeness, because he was posturing a little further than I wanted to be, because I was okay hugging. And so I found myself accidentally using a tool, and I realized that as I was talking that I had bridged the gap there.
That's good. You have that awareness and you compensated for that. So the purpose of this exercise is to make us have that awareness as proxemics apply to our communication and how we interact with each other. And there's some hazards with this awareness sometimes, because after a while you start looking at everyone, even your family members, differently. And if they've gone through the same training, then you can really have fun. Now, this now moves on to the next phase of our training here, and that is the care approach. And there's a gentleman named Cavett Robert, very successful businessman, very successful speaker. And he coined the phrase, "They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." I mean, a lot of us know walking encyclopedias out there, people who are subject matter experts. And that's fine and dandy. But if they don't have good bedside manners, or if they don't show an interest in you, you really don't have that much interest in them outside of the material or the expertise they're providing to you. So our next focus is on the care approach, which is being compassionate, attentive, responsive, and being eclectic. As we look at the care approach, you can definitely relate personally to your profession and what you do, because you've got the human element involved in the